Hey there, this is Trevor Grindle, one of the producers of the Allender Center podcast, and welcome back. This is part 2 of a conversation with Cole Arthur Riley, author of This Here Flesh, co-hosted by Rachael Chen and Linda Royster from the Allender Center. If you missed the first part, you can go to the previous episode entitled This Here Flesh with Cole Arthur Riley Part 1 to hear Cole speak about the impact of her family of origin on her life. We'll rejoin this conversation as Rachael asks Cole about the ways she has encountered God in the midst of encountering the trauma and the horrors of her own story.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Part of why I really am so excited that you and Linda are getting to have this conversation together is Linda is one of my favorite people in how she talks about shalom. And so when I saw your line very early on in Dignity about, what is shalom, but dignity stretched out like a blanket over the cosmos. I just thought, and then shortly after that, this sense of a God becoming a seamstress, like on the day the world began to die, that sense of when really trauma and harm and severing and brokenness entered our reality, that God became a seamstress. And so I'm just so curious, how have you encountered God in new ways through this writing, which gets real close to, both that sense of horror and beauty?
It's probably because I'm going into these stories of my family and I needed that. But I think that's why you see this kind of parental language a lot when I'm talking about divine, a mother kind of cradling a child in the middle of the night, and these real acts of tenderness and also, the divine as a child and playful and all of these things. I have been in spiritual spaces and have celebrated them. I've participated in them. I've perpetuated them. Spiritual spaces that had such a kind of narrow presentation of God to kind of placate everyone's uncertainty. Like, everyone's terrified, so it's like, we need to name this and we need to be clear and it needs to be decided, because that makes it feel safe and, controllable. And I think as I wrote this book and getting close to your stories, you have to become really honest about what you actually think, what I actually believed. And when I did that, I found this kind of opening. I felt kind of my experience of God and the divine just expand, and then I could just breathe a little bit in the fluidity and to allow it to change and not be static, and to have these, I go into scripture at different points, and every time I did, I'm like, how can I really read this in a way that feels true to me and, true to what was happening in the story, as opposed to kind of what maybe I've been indoctrinated to pay attention to. Yeah. And so that you reference that moment in Genesis where I call God a seamstress. And, we've all heard about the kind of punishment,
we've heard a lot, haven't we? We've heard a lot.
Yeah. And we have, and it's like, but there's this beautiful line that, I'd never paid attention to of, and God made them clothes out of skin. And it brings all of these questions to your mind about it. It expands who you expect the divine to be, how you expect the divine to operate in the world. Like, okay, did God kneel in the dirt? How did he make this? Does that mean that God made the first kill? If he made the clothes out of animal skins? It brings all this complexity in emotion and in practice into the person of God when you kind of view these specific moments and allow them to take up space.
And it can be normative for us to see God in the feminine, and not only masculine father God, but mothering God or mother God as well. So I think that's something that it was very clear to me, is your freedom to use language to expand our understanding or imagination of who God is and how God may manifest and show up, and the sense that it gave you more freedom. I think as you became more embodied in the storytelling and listening to the story and writing the story, it sounds like it was a pathway into your own body, into your own self and being, as well as an opening up of your understanding of how God manifests and presents God's self.
Yes. Yeah. That was so beautifully said. I don't even want to add to it. I'm like, oh, I wish I had a pen. If you're listening, just rewind what Linda just said. Because that is, I did experience this kind of, as I liberated the image of God and allowed it to present in different ways, I did feel liberated. I felt more free. That's not to say it's not costly. It comes with costs, and not everyone is prepared to kind of experience God in that way, and they might feel threatened by a maternal expression of God. And I knew, okay, that's the cost, and it's worth it to me, because I'm experiencing this kind of connection. I finished writing, and I can truly say I felt so near to myself. If that makes sense. I felt so close to like my own soul. But even if I knew that if people read this book and, saw the different ways I talked about God, and they disagreed or disliked it, I knew I could be proud, because I honored, what was actually occurring in my interior world, as opposed to just constantly adapting, which I, do a lot, not in writing, thankfully. So yeah, everything you just said is what I hope that I've experienced and that readers experience.
Well, one of the things I really appreciate too, and we talk a lot about this at the Allender Center, you lean into like our response and our participation with God. Like, you name lament as a form of hope, a language of hope. You talk about anger as like a necessary, important, and even faithful response to injustice in the world. And again, those are also, lament is this like marriage of grief and anger, this kind of protest cry that actually is incredibly faithful if we if we say God is who God says God is. So the divine, this love, this eminent, pervasive love, one who creates in dignity and flourishing. When we look around and see that does not feel true. And I'm just curious for you, has that sense of lament as a holy form of hope, a language of hope, has that always felt true for you, or is that something that's been emerging?
It hasn't, sadly. So, we talked about my little girl self and this moment of crying in the car, and I didn't understand why I was crying. I couldn't explain why that was happening. I had a very rich emotional range as a child. I just did. And, but I received the message in whatever ways that's not okay. And so as I grew up, that's the part of my child self that I kind of left behind, that I'm disconnected from, because it felt like a risk to my belonging or whatever. Internally, I'm depressed. I have been depressed for over a decade, but I kind of have disconnected from my emotional experiences. So to my friends, reading that I was an emotional little girl, they're just kind of puzzled, like, Cole doesn't do that. Cole is logical and analytical, which of course we put in contrast to emotion, which is just sad. So anyways, I learned to kind of disconnect from my anger, from my sadness for a long time, and it's only in the past 5 to 6 years that I've really started to allow myself to feel deeply and not be ashamed of it. And it's taken people, there are a handful of people that I've encountered, actually Rachael being one of them. I journaled about Rachael the day after I met her. I journaled about her. She seemed like this mystery to me. I'm like, how can someone hold so much? And I've encountered a handful of people that really have such a kind of fierce commitment to their emotional experience and in protection over, creation, in protection over people they love, that it almost felt like a memory, like it felt like it was taking me to places in my story that I'd forgotten about. And I'm like, oh, that feels familiar to me when I encounter it in these people, when I encountered it in Rachael and others, that commitment. And so it's helped me to start to kind of approach my sadness and my anger in a different way. I write about it probably because I'm so desperate for it. I'm desperate for people to continue to tell me it's okay to cry, your belonging's not at stake. You don't need to be happy, you don't need to be positive. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned this. I'll say this, Linda, and then I will definitely make space for you. But you have this line when you're talking about fear. Find those who tell you do not be afraid, yet stay close enough. Stay close enough to tremble with you. This is love. And it seems like that's also what you're saying. Like, in order for us to really have the courage to step into these places, where there is just heartache and sorrow and anger, and fear, that it certainly helps when we encounter those who can hold hope for us, but not in a way that asks us to deny what's there, and can kind of be with us and suffer with us something of what is real and true, and how that does change us, because it is really hard to enter those waters alone.
As I hear you talk about your meeting Rachael and what she sparked in you, and kind of helping you reconnect to some of your emotions that maybe have been suppressed. I tend to think of it as that being a way of coming back to your body, or embodiment, right? And I think embodiment is one of the holiest acts of what it means to be human, is to be embodied. I don't get the sense that there's much more that's holier than that as human beings. I think some of the most wicked acts done to us, like trauma, is it works to separate us from ourselves, which fundamentally I think is like some of the most satanic things that can ever be done to a human being. So embodiment, coming home to yourself, being in your body and comfortable in your body, I think that's holy. And when I think of the way that, and I see the way that you laid out the chapters and the title of the chapter, my soul says to me, there is something going on in this dance and the way you laid out the chapter. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it seems like there's something like it tugs at my heart when I think about not only the title of each chapter, but the way you placed each chapter. It's like this intermingling, or this interplay or dance, if you will, with how you laid out chapters 1 through 15. So I'm wondering, what was that process like for you? We spent a lot of time talking about embodiment and being in touch with your emotions or not. And I'm just very aware of the title of each chapter. So
Yes.
I would love for you to put words to your process of naming the chapters and the laying, and how you laid out each chapter or ordered them.
Well, first I'll say to the what you've said about embodiment. I went back and forth for a long time about whether or not to give body its own chapter, because I thought, I want to make sure it's communicated in each chapter. So should it be its own? And eventually I did make it its own, because I felt like to understand me, I needed to share my experience with chronic illness. But that chapter outline, it was intentional. I mean, I knew that I wanted to begin at dignity because I've known, what it is to have your story reduced to pain and reduced to trauma. And I knew the places I was going, and my grandma's story and my father's story. And I felt very protective over them. And I didn't want them to be reduced, to chapter 6 and 6, 7, 8, whatever they are. And so I wanted to start with dignity, because I think so often, marginalized people, oppressed people, neglected people, they're told that the most important thing is, what's happened to them and the oppression that's happened to them. And I thought, let's start with something inherent, and was lucky enough to be in community with people who really helped to show me dignity as inherent and not as something worked toward or proven, but just this mysterious kind of origin story. And then from there, I kind of take time getting to the sadness, getting to the fear, getting to the anger, because I want to establish this connection with the self and dignity, this connection with the earth and your location and place, this sense of wonder and this sense of beauty and miracle that's in the world, that I talk about in the wonder chapter. I really wanted to ground us there, before I kind of asked people to go to the basement, go to those places. I wanted to ground them in, where they could breathe, and and there's sadness in those early chapters for sure, but it's kind of a slow entrance, so it doesn't feel so disorienting. And then after, rage, and we start to kind of, I don't want to say get a downward hill, but this kind of the story, I think, becomes more restful. It's asking less of you as the book ends. It's asking less and less and drawing you more and more into rest. At least I hope, in repair and in memory and in liberation. So yeah, that was kind of my thinking. I think about I was a part of this Christian organization. Sorry, I'm trying to remember. Oh, so there are people who have, this theology of the kind of trajectory of the world being kind of creation, the fall, redemption, restoration. I think maybe that was in me on some level, because when I look at the chapters now, you can kind of see that, as much as I was like trying to escape those places, I think there's something kind of good and true in that kind of story. It's not completely isolated to those things, of course. Nothing happens in a vacuum, but that general trajectory, I think I ended up mirroring. Yeah, I don't know if there's a name for that. But
Yeah, so essentially, what comes to mind is what came to mind as you were talking just now is that it sounds like the framework of good therapy and good story work is that there is a gentle entry into the harder parts of the story. There's a kind of pacing that you can begin with kindness and kind of a kind foundation as you enter into the more difficult parts of the story. So as you're talking and letting us know kind of the layout of the book, that's the sense that I get as well. It's like there was a gentle entry into the more heartbreaking parts of the story, which I think also feels like a reflection or mirroring of the story of the gospel. That it takes us on this trajectory of the entry and then gradually getting into more and more heartache and the depth of the heartache until it gets to a resurrection and then something beyond the resurrection. Right. So I sense too that was also being reflected in the way you laid out the book, is that you took us on a journey, and that journey was beautiful and heartbreaking and hopeful and agonizing. And I could tell that it cost you something to tell the stories that you were telling. to write the stories that you were writing. And that it was not only for your benefit, but it was for us as well. It was for the reader too. And so I get the sense that it was this interplay between you're writing for yourself, you're writing for your grandmom, you're writing for your father, but you're also writing for all of us who will lay eyes and engage and journey through this book, that we would experience a kind of resurrection of our own because of how you've laid your life bare for us to kind of experience and to lean into. So deep gratitude for what you opened yourself up to on your own behalf, but on our behalf as well. Kind of modeling for us in a sense of what it might look like to give oneself over to the deeper story and the wider story with kindness, with patience, with generosity.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to honor our time because I feel like, Cole, we could definitely just keep engaging you and have so many more questions and just so many more things to make note of for the gift that you've given us. One thing I'll say as we come to a close is even as you're talking about the trajectory of the book, I'm so struck by, and I don't want to give anything away because those who haven't read it, I want them to have their own encounter, but even your notion of what it means to come to a place of joy and repair and rest is where some of your most honest utterances of your body and what you've known and where you can connect with the stories in your family, both in really painful ways and in deeply knowing ways. And I just think so many people who, like you're saying, Linda, who bear some of that reality in their own bodies will find tremendous hope in that rest doesn't mean we have to split off or eradicate the painful stories, that there can be a kind of integration and holiness and hope and rest that comes even when we're uttering truth that maybe we haven't uttered before. And I just so deeply appreciated your courage there, your courage to name what it is, to live in your body with kindness and with honesty. So I also echo a deep thank you. It's such a labor of love to write from your own story. So if people were interested in finding access to this here flesh, where can they find it? I mean, obviously we know like the big bookstores, but where would you hope they would find it?
Yes, you can buy it anywhere books are sold, but local independent bookstores, it's always better. Yeah. So,
well, I hope if you're listening and you have found this conversation to be life-giving, and I would say for myself, just such a robust and life-giving conversation, I hope you will go and get Cole's book and you will spend time with it. And that you will, if you find her voice to be one that just brings a lot of encouragement to you, you can become a supporter of her on Patreon. And she writes incredible liturgy you get access to if you're a part of that community. She had incredible Lenten liturgy that was very beautiful to journey with. So again, Cole, thank you. Linda, thank you. It's so good to be with you all today.
Thank you. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, Rachel.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.